This is things I wish I could say in Sunday school. I want to share some thoughts and ideas that are different than what we usually hear. My goal is to be really honest rather than inherently faith-promoting. I hope these ideas may spark some interesting discussions with your friends, families, or classes. Please enjoy. This is the lesson from March 17th through 23rd, Doctrine and Covenants, sections 23 through 26. Today's topics are Emma Hale Smith and common consent. I'm going to start today by talking about Emma Hale Smith Bideman. I am not an expert on Emma, but my great aunt, Linda King Knoll, was. She co-authored Mormon Enigma, a biography of Emma Hale Smith. There were moments when she would tell stories from the years she spent researching the book. It was fascinating. I've never studied anything as in-depth as she studied the life of Emma. In the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, people don't really know what to say about Emma. We like to hero worship a lot. We tend to only tell positive stories of early church leaders and ignore or spin anything negative. Emma's life is difficult for members to hero worship because she opposed Brigham Young and polygamy. The church loves black and white, clear-cut narratives, and it's pretty much impossible to do that with Emma. I'm just going to mention some noteworthy things about her life before I discuss the content of Doctrine and Covenants, section 25. She married Joseph Smith in 1827. Her parents opposed the marriage. Joseph Smith had failed attempts at finding buried treasure on the Hales' land. They thought he was a fraud. She defied her parents and married him anyway. She lost her first child shortly after birth, and the same happened with twins a few years later. Then they adopted twins, where the mother died in childbirth. One of those twins died at 10 months, and the other lived until adulthood. Then, over the next 7 years, she had 3 children that lived. Her next child lived for 10 months. The one after that was stillborn. Emma was pregnant when Joseph Smith was murdered, and her final child came in November 1844. Of her 11 children, 5 lived to adulthood. By all accounts, Emma was intelligent. Emma was a scribe during some of Joseph Smith's translation of the Book of Mormon. She never saw the plates. She compiled the first hymn book. She was the first president of the Relief Society, and she opposed polygamy. It's not entirely clear from historical records, but based on what can be inferred, she caught Joseph Smith in flagrante with Fanny Alger. That's how Emma found out that Joseph Smith was practicing polygamy. Fanny Alger married Joseph Smith when she was 14. She was kind of like a live-in housekeeper, helper, so she had a close relationship with Emma. Yet, Joseph Smith entered into a polygamous marriage with her and kept it all from Emma. Emma was distraught, as you can imagine, and confided in some of her Relief Society counselors, not knowing that they also had already married her husband secretly. That level of betrayal that Emma experienced is kind of hard for me to imagine. Joseph Smith claiming he was only following God's command, and the fact that their entire community supported him and believed in him, makes things really hard for Emma to decide what to do with that betrayal. By all accounts, Emma believed in him as a prophet too. Emma was never okay with polygamy, but to openly defy Joseph would have put Emma on the outs with her community because Joseph Smith was their leader and prophet. She might have even lost her children in a divorce. Women had so few rights back then. And polygamy was still a secret then. No one was open about it. Most members had no idea it was happening. It was a really difficult situation for Emma. And then her first husband was murdered by a mob. Emma wanted their son, Joseph Smith III, to be the next prophet, and there was another man who was a stake president that she wanted to be president of the church until her son was old enough, but that man didn't want it. The majority of the members of the church supported the Quorum of the 12 taking over the leadership, which made Brigham Young de facto president until he made himself president of the church 3 years later. There was a lot of conflict between Emma and Brigham Young. Emma carried a lot of sway in the church, and she was the mother of Joseph Smith's children, and Brigham Young wanted her support. But she didn't support him, so he maligned her in retaliation. There were also a lot of financial issues. It wasn't well delineated what was Joseph's property and what was the church's. Both were in a lot of debt. It was complicated sorting out the assets of his estate. When Brigham Young moved the church to Utah, Emma stayed in Nauvoo with all of her children. She married Louis Bideman in 1847. He was not a Mormon. She raised her family in Nauvoo, though it was very empty after the church moved to Utah. She still considered herself a Latter-day Saint, just not affiliated with the Brigham Young faction. In 1860, her son, Joseph Smith III, was sustained as president of another Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. 12 years later, they added reorganized to the beginning of the name. Emma joined her son's church. She died in 1879. That's a brief history of Emma. Now I'm going to talk about Doctrine and Covenants, section 25. I think it's incredibly manipulative. We are trained in the church to think about this like it is a message to Emma from God. But we have to remember that this is coming from her husband, Joseph Smith. It's a mixture of praise, laying down the law, threats, and lofty promises. I'll read verses 3 through 5. Behold, thy sins are forgiven thee, and thou art an elect lady, whom I have called. Murmur not because of the things which thou hast not seen, for they are withheld from thee and from the world, which is wisdom in me in a time to come. And the office of thy calling shall be for a comfort unto my servant Joseph Smith Jr., thy husband, in his afflictions, with consoling words, in the spirit of meekness. Emma is told she is elect. Her sins are forgiven. But also, don't complain because you don't actually get to see the golden plates that your new religion is based on. Emma is told that God wants her to be nice and comforting to Joseph. So in these verses, we get some praise and some laying down the law. Then she's told that she'll be ordained to teach in the church, and she is to create a hymn book. Now I'm going to read verses 13 through 15. Wherefore, lift up thy heart and rejoice, and cleave unto thy covenants which thou hast made. Continue in the spirit of meekness, and beware of pride. Let thy soul delight in thy husband, and the glory which shall come upon him. Keep my commandments continually, and a crown of righteousness thou shalt receive. And except thou do this, where I am you cannot come. Here Emma is told to remember her covenants. Beware of pride. Find joy in your husband's glory, and keep the commandments, or else. More laying down the law, threats, and lofty promises. The stuff that bothers me most are the instructions about how to treat Joseph. This is next level passive aggressiveness by Joseph Smith. He doesn't just talk to Emma privately about some areas of friction so they can address the issues and support each other. Instead, he has a revelation from God that Emma needs to be nicer to him, comfort him with consoling words, and that she should get her happiness from his glory. What kind of response would she even be allowed to have in this context? It's either get in line and obey your husband, or you're in defiance of God. It's so gross that he would speak to his wife this way and treat her like this. Section 26 introduces the idea that the church works by common consent. Basically, that everyone agrees to the church's actions. Unanimous agreement. We often think about how we raise our hands to sustain callings and positions in the church. However, consent implies that you can say no, and that effectually isn't the case in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have no real mechanism for conscientious dissent in the church. I often think about consent in the context of sexual relations. There are a couple of nuances there that I want to highlight. First, consent is an unambiguous, affirmative, and conscious decision. Second, there cannot be any deception used in order to obtain consent. Deception negates the consent, because the person was deceived as to what they were consenting to. Third, consent needs to be informed, meaning that any relevant information that could impact consent is shared prior. In a sexual context, this would mean that someone discloses that they have an STD to a potential new sexual partner prior. If you're hiding information that is relevant to the other party, they cannot actually consent because they're not properly informed about what they're agreeing to. Now, if we think about the principle of common consent in the church, are we given all the relevant information by the church or our congregation prior to being asked for our common consent? And any time the church deceives us, it negates our consent. Essentially, there is no real consent in the church. Almost no one is fully informed prior to baptism. The church's polygamous history and sketchy finances are not part of the lessons a potential convert receives before baptism. And there are many, many other issues that are relevant to a person considering joining the organization. None are disclosed. Then, once we're in the church, perpetual complete consent is implied. We're asked to raise our hands, but the decisions have already been made. We're treated as if our consent has already been given because we're in the church, and the church made these choices. The phrase, "it appears as though the sustaining has been unanimous," is a farce, because it's not completely unanimous. They just ignore any dissent because they're so big they can. They care about the appearance of consent and unity, but not actual consent and unity. Now I want to talk about dissenting in the church. Obviously, I disagree with a lot in the church, but I don't have any outlet within the church for my disagreements. I have tried with some small local things to address it with bishops and stake presidents, and the message I've always received is basically, get in line. Don't be an agitator. As long as I stay in the church and stay quiet, it's implied that I'm consenting to everything the church does. I don't. That's part of the reason I'm not quiet anymore. In order to feel like I have integrity, I have to register my dissent somehow. Otherwise, I'm consenting. I'm kind of sad because as I've been thinking through this principle, there are very few ways to actually register your dissent in the church. Speaking up has not worked for me. I don't think it really works for anyone. It leads to either being marginalized in your congregation or could lead to excommunication. Quitting tithing is an option. The church cares a lot about money. However, the church has intentionally tied full membership and participation in the church to paying tithing. So quitting tithing will also marginalize you. Resigning your membership is another option. And I kind of think this is the only way to effectively withdraw your consent from the church. Resigning may be the only way to say to the church, I don't agree with you. I just think it's so sad that the church created this internal ecosystem that's so fragile that no one can disagree internally without essentially being shoved out. The principle of common consent contributes to the problem. And I feel like this problem exists in all levels of the church as well. I think about how David O. McKay wanted to end the priesthood ban for Black people, but there were too many racists on the Quorum of the 12. Kimball didn't get it done until D.L. Stapley was sick in the hospital and Mark E. Peterson was on assignment overseas. That's when they could get everyone to agree. My understanding is that once they all agreed without the two holdout racists, those two were informed that a revelation had been received and it's unanimous. Basically, if you try to disagree now, you're going to blow up your life, family, and legacy in the church. Again, not really unanimous consent. I also feel like this principle leads to gridlock at the head of the church. There's so much pressure to support the leaders that we miss out on a lot of innovative thinking in our rush to support the status quo. Thanks for listening. Please share with family and friends. Until next time.